I felt moved to try to explain the issue that we're having when it comes to jurisdiction. And how that is the crux, and how that is what we are losing in this country. Because these jurisdictions are what protects our individual liberties and our individual rights and our ability to even prosper and to live in this country. So if you'll bear with me, I went back into a presentation that I gave to some state legislatures 4 years ago. And trying to help them understand what is happening to us. And I'm going to give you just the first part of it. And then I'll talk about more about specifically about some of the events that my family has gone through and so forth. As you know, from Nevada, Nevada is called the Battle-Born State because it became a state in 1864 during the Civil War. And okay, let's see if we got some more technology issue here. And I take responsibility for all of it. I really do. This is part of the reason why I don't use technology. Oh, I can just do that. Okay, good. Okay. So, yeah, maybe turn it down. So, the United States, I won't go into it, but basically it was obtained, the area was obtained through the Mexican-American War, through the Treaty of Guadalupe, and basically we won the war. The United States won the war, and we claimed that area. And there was some definitely some impacts or some specifics that are in the Treaty of Guadalupe that are very important because the people of that area, when the treaty was made, basically the people of the area wanted to become part of the United States. And so the Treaty of Guadalupe actually says that, Guadalupe Hidalgo actually says that once the people of that area become populated enough that they can then apply to become a state, and that the United States has to let them in, and then once they become a state, that they have the right that the right to religion, the right to their property, and other rights will be honored and protected equal to the other states. That's what the treaty actually says. So then we move on here, other way. In 1864, President Lincoln admitted Nevada into the Union. And I just want to kind of look here. It was on the 21st day, and it says, an act to enable the people of Nevada to form a constitution and to form, that's supposed to be formed, and constitution and state government, and for the admission of such state into the Union on equal footing with the original states. And then later on he says, now therefore be it known that I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, in accordance with the duty imposed upon me by the acts of Congress aforesaid, do hereby declare and proclaim that the said state of Nevada is admitted into the Union on equal footing with the original states. So what is a state? And what did President Lincoln mean when he said that Nevada has equal footing with the original states? Now, statehood, this is a dictionary definition, Oxford University, the state of being a recognized independent nation. The transition from late colonialism to political statehood, the status of being a state in the United States. So there are two political jurisdictions that comprise the United States. We have state, and then we have federal. Political jurisdictions of the United States are the various government entities that together form the United States. The senior jurisdiction is the state. The United States government and each state government operate within a system of constitutional jurisdiction. We're going to talk about that. And so, state jurisdiction. States are not subsidiaries created under the federal government. I hope no one in here believes that. Because the federal government was not even around until the states got together and created the Constitution, which is a contract between the states. a compact or a charter. Now, how can the federal government be party to the Constitution if it wasn't created until the Constitution made it? So, but my point is that the states are not subsidiaries under the federal government. Rather, political units with plenary jurisdiction over the enumerated powers listed in that state's constitution. So the state has power to or jurisdiction over whatever the people said the state has in the state jurisdiction, or state constitution. Okay, federal jurisdiction within an admitted state is limited by the enumerations listed. That's an error. I adjusted this just a little bit and I didn't have any proofread it. So the enumerations listed in the U.S. Constitution. So basically we have the U.S. Constitution lists the jurisdictional powers that the federal government has, or the general government, or the U.S. government. So you have two jurisdictions, and both jurisdictions are controlled by the people's constitutions. The state constitution controls the state government and gives them jurisdiction. The U.S. Constitution controls the federal government and gives them jurisdiction. And beyond that, let's go here. The primary political unit of the United States is the state. According to numerous decisions of the United States Supreme Court, the 50 individual states and the United States government are separate political jurisdictions. The Constitution maintains the sovereign jurisdiction of each state, and the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reinforces parallel jurisdiction, declaring that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are retained by the states respectively or the people. So this amendment is declaring jurisdictional limitations between the people, the states, and the U.S. government. So let's talk about it. So we have jurisdictions, different jurisdictions, and the state's jurisdiction is over the county and the townships. The federal jurisdiction is over the territories and the districts. And each division has specific jurisdictions delegated to them by the people. Now, why would I bring this up in this meeting? We've talked about, Chris talked several times about jurisdiction, in the courts, or they didn't have jurisdiction on the reservation, or they did have jurisdiction on the reservation. They didn't have jurisdiction on this boundary, but they did on this boundary. And that is all based upon this jurisdiction, this constitutional jurisdiction. And so the people are the ones who make the law. They're the ones who establish the law in this country. They did it through the constitutions, the U.S. Constitution and their states' constitutions. And so you have the U.S. Constitution granting the federal government jurisdiction over this, and this area, and this, and this subject matter. And it's very clear. The Constitution enumerates the powers of the general government, the federal government. And beyond that, they can't step beyond that. And the state constitution gives the state jurisdiction over all of these matters. For example, water. We talked about water here. The state has jurisdiction over the waters. The federal government does not have jurisdiction over the waters. And so on and so forth. And those boundaries, those jurisdiction or constitutional jurisdiction, protect you and protect me. They're designed to protect us, to keep our governments from stepping over the boundaries of what we placed upon them. And they check the states and the federal government, the counties and the people, they all check each other, check and balance each other. And it's all for the protection of the individual. And that is why it is so important that we understand this. And that's why we're not ranting and raving when we keep saying the Constitution, the Constitution, the Constitution. That's not what we're doing. What we're saying is that you're stepping over the jurisdiction that protects our liberty. That's what you're doing. And you keep doing it more and more and more, to the point where we're being threatened. To the point where you see what you just saw in that video. 213 armed men come down upon a family. And it's all over jurisdiction. Or they raid a museum. Or they go raid a man's house who is highly regarded in the community. And he kills himself because they're threatening to take his life and livelihood away. Threatening to take his family's livelihood away. Or even his family's liberty away. And they say that if you don't, plea or whatever else it is, that we're going to do this and this and this to you. Well, they should not be there in the first place. Why? Because the constitutional jurisdiction, the jurisdiction that the people gave them, does not go beyond their boundaries, right? And you hear about federal overreach, right? We say that term. What does that mean? That means that they're going beyond their jurisdiction. You hear even the courts. Did you know the first thing the court has to do is establish jurisdiction? Yeah. That's the very first thing a court has to do. What does that mean? They have to establish whether they have authority to administer the judicial process, whatever it is. And it is important that we understand jurisdiction. Why did I get up here and say what I did earlier in the questions? Because there was a man here who gave a great presentation with a ton of awesome information showing how the management of our forests has been poor and how it's destroyed us, how it's unhealthy and all that. But yet, in my opinion, seem to uphold this infringement upon jurisdiction. That it's okay to allow the federal government to come into our states and to control these lands. And it is not. And all these issues that we are seeing, that my family has experienced, that Chris Cortlander has experienced, that the Hammonds experienced, that Lavoy Finicum and his family have experienced, that the Red family has experienced, and I could go on and on literally probably for a day, maybe more, listing names, is all because of the constitutional jurisdiction boundaries that have been crossed. And that is why we have to understand that. That is why, rather than getting up here and telling you my story, and taking the time to do that, that's why I feel it's so important that I do this. Because the understanding that jurisdiction, meaning a state legislature does not have authority to make laws on everything. They can only make laws on what the state constitution gives them jurisdiction to make laws on. U.S. Congress does not have authority to make laws on everything. They can only make laws on what the U.S. Constitution gives them authority to make laws on. And the bureaucrats can't exercise law on anything that is beyond their constitutional limitations. And that would protect us all. We wouldn't need this meeting. We would not need it if we understood and stood for constitutional jurisdiction. It's what protects us. Now, since I've got your attention here, I'm just going to go quickly through this because I want you to understand a little bit of why these Western lands and how they've been taken over, or at least the justification that the U.S. government is using. Because you have something that's called territories, or we had a whole bunch of territories, right? And we still have some territories today. Guam and Puerto Rico, those are territories, right? Which means they are jurisdictions or areas of land that have been turned into a legal jurisdiction that have not been enabled into the Union as a state. We haven't allowed them to come into the state on an equal footing, meaning they don't have all the rights. Now, according to the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, territories fall under the jurisdiction of the United States government. And it actually says that they can make, the U.S. Congress can make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territories. And actually, that's the way the reservations fall, right? Whether you agree with it, constitutionally or not. Basically, they claim that they own they have unlimited jurisdiction over these areas. Now, but constitutionally, in Article 4.3, it does give the United States government authority to have full jurisdiction over the territories, okay? Now, let me show you here. Now, so we have in the pink the original 13 states, right? Did the U.S. government have jurisdiction over the 13 states? No, they had none. The U.S. government wasn't even created. Okay? Now, then once the Constitution was established, then they determined that the territories, right, were going to fall under the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the United States government would have jurisdiction to make all needful rules according to the Constitution, make all needful rules within the territory. So this is the maps of our growth. So now you start to look, the Congress broke up the territories into 4 territories. Now, did you see what just happened there? Ohio just became a state. What happened when Ohio became a state?
No federal jurisdiction.
All of a sudden, the United States government lost jurisdiction over that state. It now became its own sovereign state. And the only jurisdictional powers that they had in it are what is listed in the Constitution, which was very limited. Okay? But look, they also, now the Louisiana Purchase, but look, now a huge more area now became under the jurisdiction of the United States. Because you have the Louisiana Purchase. Who's controlling the orange? The United States government. Who is controlling the pink? The people within the state. And then it's broken up to counties, and that way a Republican form of government is protected. And what's the purpose of the counties, the states, and the federal government? Is to protect the individual. Because, don't forget, the counties are broken up into what? Well, towns, private property. Who has jurisdiction over private property? The individual does. And it is a jurisdiction. And there's limit. It's all to protect that private property jurisdiction. Okay? So now let's move on here. So you look, they split the Louisiana territory. They got some more up in the Oregon country. There's some more states that were established. Louisiana. And we have Missouri. Now this is the growth pattern of the United States. It is the way the founders established this, or set the path on for this, for our protection. As we populate the area, it becomes a state. And all the private property and everything falls under personal jurisdiction, under county jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, and federal jurisdiction according to the limitations upon the Constitution. Let's keep going here. So you see, the federal government is losing jurisdiction. And that was intended. That was intentional. Keep going here. Oh, what's the green? Well, that's the Confederacy. That was during the Civil War. And it's interesting this map shows that. So you can see here now Nevada. You see Nevada. See how the bottom part of Nevada is cut off? That was an interesting argument that they didn't want to have in court. They dismissed it before that. But you can see here now the U.S. government won the war, or the Union did, however you want to look at that. And you start to see these things. Look at, now the federal government has very little jurisdiction out here in the West. They're losing it by design. Here we go, until we get to here. Now, did the founders see us just ending at 51 states? Or excuse me, yeah, 50 states. I say 51 because that's what I'm getting at. Did they end at 50 states? No. They saw this growth pattern of freedom spreading throughout as much of the world as it possibly could. Because it protects the individual. It is a design that basically becomes a system of protecting individual freedom. Their design was to spread freedom throughout the whole world. And this is the way it was done. It was done by either through acquisition or through even war if necessary, but basically taking an area and it become a U.S. territory, encouraging the disposal and the people to go out and populate that area. And then once it became strong enough and populated enough that it could become an independent people, so a free people, then it would make a state out of it. And now those people are protected under statehood. Their private property is protected. Their individual liberties are protected. And the only job of the federal government is just to protect the states in their freedom. And that was the growth pattern of the founders. And you can see here that without jurisdiction, proper jurisdiction, without proper boundaries, you cannot have individual freedom because of the encroachment of criminals. And without the Constitution defining those boundaries, you can't argue where they're at. You can't argue who's supposed to be here, who does this. Well, so when we're saying, and constantly saying that in Article 1, 817 is a limitation that the federal government has, that the states and the people put on the federal government in owning property inside a state, what we're saying is that was the protection that the founders put upon the federal government, or for us, upon the federal government, to keep them from coming in and stealing all the land. And that's exactly what is happening. Why? Because we have not understood this jurisdiction. That the federal government does not have jurisdiction to control the land and resources inside a state. And they don't have criminal jurisdiction either. They do not have jurisdiction to be doing what they're doing. Almost all of what they're doing. Because it's very limited. And it causes chaos. And it will continue to cause chaos until we force them back in the box. We don't want to get rid of the federal government. We need them. We don't want to get rid of the state governments. We need them. The counties? No, we don't. We want them to align with the jurisdiction, the limitations that we placed upon them, so that we can be free. So we don't have to live in fear like my father has his entire life almost, of whether the federal government was going to come down upon him and kill his family. My dad was saying this 25 years ago. He was pleading with the state government in record saying, look, I fear for the safety of my family because of this unconstitutional jurisdiction overreached by the federal government. So please understand this. And then finally, let's get into this a little bit. Private jurisdiction. Who gave us jurisdiction over our bodies, our homes, our vehicles, and our other property? God did. He gave us our life. And He gave us our liberty. And He says, I make you free. And that is the ultimate jurisdiction. And that is what all these other jurisdictions are designed to protect. And so when I see, or others, I know it's the same. When we see a law that allows somebody to, no matter what it is, if you want to call it law enforcement or whatever, but allows somebody to take and violate a person and strip them down, especially when due process is not offered to them, when they have to be stripped over and over and over again. Then you start to, well, wait a minute. You were never given jurisdiction over my body. And I spent almost an entire year in solitary confinement fighting that battle. I would not let them strip me. And so they force strip me, and they throw me in solitary confinement for months on end. And they would come to with their videos every 2 or 3 times a day. Are you ready to submit to a strip search? And I'm standing naked in front of them. Over and over again. But I constantly was saying, you do not have jurisdiction over my body. And you do not have jurisdiction over my home. You do not have jurisdiction over my vehicles or any other property that I have. That's my jurisdiction. And that's what this country is about. It's about protecting the personal, private jurisdiction. That's why we have elected officials. Their whole point and whole purpose is to protect you and my personal jurisdiction. Amen. My body, my private property. That's what it's about. If you look on a county map, I actually went up, but because of my technological incompetency, I don't think I will try to pull it back up again. But I looked at the map of Montana, okay? And I could see, first of all, the upper part of Montana, there's a line. And above that is everything looks a lot different, right? You don't see the national monuments and all of that extend beyond that line. And why? Because that's not jurisdiction of the United States, right? It's not jurisdiction of Montana. It's a jurisdiction belonging to another people, the Canadian people, if you will, or even the province, which that's a whole other thing that we could talk about. And then you look at the state of Montana, there's boundaries. And you go into it, and you see counties and county lines. And you go into it further, and you see other lines that are a lot smaller, and they got a home on it. That is personal jurisdiction. And the founders looked at that as something that you can't invade, that you're not supposed to invade. You're not supposed to go and just kick in the door because of whatever reason. That jurisdiction is the most sacred jurisdiction of all. It belongs to you and I. See if I can get it up here. Our bodies, our homes, our transportation, and our other property, and I could list all those. But that's what this is about. And in fact, when we talk about fighting the UN or not wanting the United States to join the UN, what we're actually saying is we don't want or need another jurisdiction. Amen. And it also, we're saying that, look, we have already said constitutionally what jurisdiction our United States government has. And we feel that if we join the UN, well, I mean, if we don't get out of it, but the issue there is not a constitution that really limits. They make their own supposed limitations. And we actually put ourselves outside the protection of a constitution. And so you begin, hopefully, to see the seriousness of jurisdictions and why it is so important that we make sure that our public lands, our homes, the private property, vested property ownership on the lands is protected. And that the jurisdictions are correct. Because right now these lands are not in a Republican form of government. You cannot correct what is happening. And no matter how many associations you participate in, no matter how much communication or joint efforts that you have with these jurisdictions that shouldn't be here in the first place, no matter how much you try, unless you follow the lines of the legal lines, the lawful lines, the constitutional lines of jurisdiction, you cannot solve the problem. You cannot be in control of your own lands. And so, with that, I'll maybe change gears a little bit. Because my family, my father he's an extremely intelligent man that has a very difficult time sometimes of articulating what he is trying to explain. But I had the privilege of being able to be his son. And we didn't always get along. That's very, I've said that many times. But what I was able to do is listen to him and see how he acted and understand. And so I was able to see, the wisdom in what he was trying to explain. I had the privilege, rather than like a meeting like this, I had the privilege of being with him and understanding what he was trying to explain. And this helped me understand truth and helped me understand these constitutional boundaries. Helped me understand all of this. And I truly began to believe and understand. And I think as time has gone on, I even had to prove to myself that what he was saying was true. And I think that's pretty natural of growing up. But my father established very early in my life this jurisdictional understanding. And I'm so grateful for that. But it also has caused my family a tremendous amount of trouble. And as you know, in 2014, federal agents come and converge upon my family's ranch. I could go into a tremendous amount of detail on that. But one of the things they began to do is they were in the mountains, and they, with a backhoe and a dump truck, and they were up there destroying our water rights. Destroying our water infrastructure, I should say. Actually tearing them out. And then, just trying to tear them out and cap them off. Now, why would they do that? I mean, and they were doing it with armed men. In fact, when we first saw the backhoe and the dump truck coming out of the mountains, it was being escorted by 13 armed vehicles. And you have to ask, why? Why were they doing that? Why was it so, why was it so heavily armed? And the reason why is because they knew exactly where my father where his rights were established. They knew where the argument was. And they also knew state law. And they knew that the state had jurisdiction. And so they were up there destroying my father's water rights, the water infrastructure. And the reason why is because state law on water rights, basically in Nevada, says that if you don't prove up on it within a period of time, which is right around 5 years, meaning if you don't use it or you don't improve it, if you can't prove what's called beneficial use, then you actually lose it and somebody else can claim it. So the federal government, by force, was going up there and making sure that my father could not use his livestock watering rights deemed with the state of Nevada. And they were going to continue to enforce that past the limit in which we can no longer claim that right. And then you know what they were going to do after that time frame? They were going to file mine in their name. Now you might say, well, how do you know that, Ammon? Well, the reason I know this is because in the state of Nevada alone, under 4 federal agencies, they have done it 5,072 times in Nevada, where they actually took private property or private water rights, and through whatever method, many methods were used, they actually pushed the owner off, and then once the owner has abandoned his rights, after a period of time, they come in and actually file under the name of U.S. Forest Service or BLM or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, whatever it is, and actually take title in the state or in the state registry. Now that's happened in all these states, just so you know. Nevada is not alone in that. I only did the research in Nevada, and I did that in 2014. And I only did it under 4 federal agencies. 5,072 water rights. What is happening to our rights? They're actually taking deed in the state. The federal government is taking them, claiming them as their own. That's exactly what's happening. Well, how many water rights do you think there are? I don't know, actually, in Nevada. But that's a pretty big chunk. They're actually stealing them. Now, wait a minute. I thought we had jurisdiction limitations. Did you know that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 limits the federal government from owning and controlling property inside the states unless it's for basically military purposes, for the use of dockyards, arsenals, and other needful buildings? That's the limitation. They basically said unless you are using the land and the resources for military purposes and other enumerated purposes, meaning you don't have authority to own. So this very problem that we are seeing with water, we've talked about it, is all solved in the Constitution. It's solved by the Constitution, by sticking to the limits and enumerations found in the Constitution. And that's why we're so radical about the Constitution. That's why we're so fanatical, right? That's why we keep saying Constitution, Constitution, Constitution. And maybe if you want to say the left or the right, whatever, if you want to say that, maybe they call us constitutional radicals, well, okay, I'm okay with that. Because it protects them just as much as it protects me. Because Now, I kind of, in a roundabout way, made a little bit of a promise. And I'm out of time, which has gone by really fast. I hope I haven't bored you to death. But I really do feel like I need to keep that promise, but also share with you something that is really sacred to me, actually. Because many of you know that in early 2016 that I went into, with several friends and ranchers, into the Maui National Wildlife Refuge, and basically just went in there and started living there. And there was 2 main reasons why we did this. One is because there was a family that was in extreme duress. And they were being ignored. And they were going back to prison for a second time for the same charges for 5 years, for the remainder of 5 years. And they were completely ignored by their locals, their state, and their federal, elected representatives or jurisdictions, if you will. And what had happened to them was just so extreme in corruption, I can't even, but basically it came to the point where it could not just be ignored. There had to be something done. We could not just go home and say, well, the poor Hammonds. We could not do that anymore because of what had happened to them and how going home, if we would have just gone home and ignored it, it would have set a precedence that said it's okay to do this to a family. And this is after a long line of abuse to them and to many other ranching families and other agricultural community or rural American families. So, number one, we went in there to bring attention to the atrocities committed by the U.S. government, U.S. Attorney's Office, upon this family. To bring attention. And to bring attention and to do our best to educate the American people on jurisdiction. And we did that the best we could, to the point where the government was losing their narrative. And actually now we have emails and documentations among them that was saying the virus is spreading, talking about our message, and that it had to be stopped. One of these emails was from Governor Kate Brown. And 2 days later, they killed Lavoy Finicum. That was the reason why.